So this is the right call, right? Or I wasn't the right call. Yeah, 3 or 4 tries and I'll actually get this right. I'm slightly better at life than technology, so that's good.
That's okay. Hey, that's my job. My job is to be good at Empower calls.
Yeah, no need for you to be good at married life yet, Nathan.
Nope, none whatsoever.
That's why we're here.
Exactly.
Hey guys, sorry for all the craziness and confusion, but welcome to the call. And welcome to Jonathan and Kara. Thank you so much for being here, especially Kara. I know this is like super rare. So let's kind of jump right into the call because I know time is precious and there's lots of wisdom to be heard. Is there anything that you want to start off with, Jonathan, or anything you want to ask?
Oh, I don't know. You sent me some questions, so we can start with those, or we can make stuff up. So whatever you think is most entertaining.
Sounds good. All right.
Most of what I'm going to say, Kara's going to correct anyhow. So it's just, we might as well get started. So.
All right. So I have honestly been dreaming about doing a call like this for a long time. People around community, whether you like it or not, we're just in that season of life where this topic comes up. And there's always people going to certain couples, whether I'm bound or not, for advice. And I'm like, you know what? I'd rather get just, the OG couple to share with us some wisdom. So how about if we can start off, Jonathan and Kara, do you mind kind of sharing with us your story, journey, whatever you want to call it, of how you guys met each other, got together, how that was like? You want?
You want the accurate version, or you want Kara's version?
I am cool with what.
Here's my short version. I worked up all my courage to invite Kara to a dance as like a first date because I thought that's what you did because I was homeschooled, she was homeschooled, and I never had a dance to invite anybody to before. I'd gone to one, but I have to go to somebody else's. And so we're at college, so we got our own dance. So I'm like, kind of worked my courage up. She said no. So I had to kind of mourn and grieve and be brokenhearted for another 6 months until we kind of got together and try to get it. So that's my version of it. Kara's is slightly different. So
sure. So, Kara, do you have
a little more background perhaps? We met when we were freshmen at college. And I actually remember meeting Jonathan the first day because one of his friends I knew his sister. And so we were in the same place and we met each other. However, Jonathan does not remember that meeting. But then we spent some more time with each other through a Christian fellowship group there on campus. And then eventually we're on our leadership team together. And that's kind of how we got connected. He did invite me to a dance that fall after I had only known him a couple of months. But someone else had already asked me to go to the dance. I had never been to a dance, wasn't really interested in going to a dance. And so I had already told this other person no, and I wasn't going to the dance. So I couldn't very well honestly turn around and then agree to go with someone else. So he also called me on the phone, and I wasn't highly impressed with that because I didn't really know him and know for sure who he actually was over the phone. So
we did, however, get it straightened out. And we were on, you guys will appreciate this, we were on an interdistrict youth cabinet that planned events for youth. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody that's on this call, but and so we were serving together on that team where we really got to spend more time together, know each other. And then I think we sort of kind of figured out that we were dating by the end of our freshman year after a few slight detours. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, we had a mutual interest by the end of our freshman year. We'll put it that way. I would not have used the term dating at that point, but
I would have, but we agreed on eventually.
Very cool. So, yeah, like I feel like I've heard this story, but I've not heard Kara's version. So that is very cool.
Normally, I get to tell it unedited.
And that's super crazy Well, apparently the blessing, curse, whatever you want to call it, for cabinet is true. Then when you work together, I've seen that a lot in like my parents or other people too. But could you kind of expand on that a little bit of where, um, in the freshman year, you guys were kind of dating? What did that look like for you guys? Like, what would you call? All right, this is dating. There was mutual interest. What was that?
I would definitely put that more as a friendship for that through the freshman year. It was really right at the end of the freshman year when we were leaving school that we kind of had a little more of a conversation about it and clarified a little more mutual interest at that point. So it was more like doing things with this Christian fellowship group, and then the leadership team started just at the end, like in the spring, basically, of that year. So it was just more of a friendship through that year.
Very cool.
We did an awful lot of stuff together as a group. We had this fellowship group we were part of, and then some mutual friends. And so we spent a lot of time doing things together in a bigger group setting. That helped a lot because it was a lot more easy to get to know people without it being sort of awkward. And then we actually got set up by two of our friends who said we were going on a group event to go to the circus, believe it or not. And then they, by mutual arrangement, ditched us and left themselves. And so that kind of ended up being a sort of accidental first date. But yeah, we spent a lot of time kind of getting to know each other first. And then it really helped being on this cabinet because we got to work together. And so there was a lot of stuff that we learned there, kind of trying to be part of a team and working on the same projects. And that was a pretty big deal. So.
Very cool.
I think, Kate, when we were thinking about this earlier, we were kind of talking about it a little bit, and it's kind of an interesting contrast. So I was the first person that Kara had dated in sort of an official fashion. And so in that sense, Kara married the first person she dated. So that was almost true for me, but that wasn't for lack of trying. I had really been interested in the girl all through high school and never got to quite work. And so kind of went through the whole, like, are we friends? Are we not friends? All this kind of thing. And then after Kara said no to the dance, I actually dated somebody else for a brief period, which turned out to be a really bad idea. And I think that's kind of important to know too, because I used to just sort of think of those as like embarrassing asides that I didn't really want to talk about. But actually over the years, I've kind of looked back at those and saw those two mistakes as actually pretty helpful to me in kind of figuring some things out. And in some ways, it really better prepared me for the relationship with Kara. And one of the cool things is that because of my Christian faith and background and training, those relationships were bruising on my heart, but they weren't damaging in other ways. And so that was, as I look at that now, it took me a long time to sort of understand that was some of those detours were actually educational, even though they were failures and slightly embarrassing and a little bit painful at the time. They weren't painful in some sort of long-term way. And in some ways, they really prepared me better for kind of knowing what I did want and being able to then relate to Kara better when we kind of got things kicked off and working together. So anyhow, I talk to a lot of folks who think it has to be perfect the whole way through. And, I might have chosen that if I could have, but I didn't. And that ultimately ended up being helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point, because I kind of want to open up to all you guys here. When we talk about what we call a perfect relationship or a perfect first start, just real quick from all of us and band people, what would you call like a perfect relationship, or what would perfect be for you guys?
You're asking next to the group, not to us, right?
I think I believe in perfect relationships. Oh, was that to everybody? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't really believe in perfect relationships, so I think I would maybe describe an ideal relationship, which for me would look like, for me, that would look like having a good relationship with the family of the girl that I'm dating. I know that sometimes for some people, depending on the family situations they have, that's more difficult than others. I have been blessed to have a really good relationship with my girlfriend's family. So that'd be one big component of it. And then just the entire time having that mutual vision of marriage as the end goal of the relationship. So that's a quick idea of what I would consider ideal. So never perfect. But.
Good stuff then. Yeah.
I think an ideal relationship would be one that was built on an understanding of like sacrificial love, because feelings of love and feelings of attraction will come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And for a relationship to last, there has to be a commitment to like a higher principle of loving someone, the verb love, even when you don't feel like it, even when you don't like them. And so that like commitment is that would be important for me.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think I would want it to be very Christ focused, I guess. Just like there's a lot of times like you can have a common vision of like we want to get married at the end of this even, and that doesn't necessarily mean like the process to get there. Like people who elope have a common vision in marriage, and I don't want to do that. Like I'd want a common vision of Christ and glorifying him and loving each other because he first loved us, kind of thing. Because I think without that, like you can't really trust each other, and when you can't trust, that is really damaging.
Yeah.
And makes it like it doesn't last.
Very cool. So Jonathan and Carrick, would you mind kind of speaking on that? Well, Jonathan, you were talking about how things don't have to be exactly perfect, and we all agree that things aren't perfect. Ben, you had a great point of what's ideal, and I think that all of us young people, we have an idea of what would be ideal. There's the big spiritual level. There's our personal preferences. But Jonathan, could you speak to that? Of what do you think you mean with things not being ideal? How to deal with that if things are not ideal, or what to look for in something that's ideal?
Yeah, so I think actually those are really excellent answers. Like I was jotting some of those down. So Ben's point about being able to know the parents of the person, I think that we ended up being really blessed in that, but we made some mistakes we were at college, so away from college. And I think if we look back at some of the things we do differently in our relationship, we probably would have handled things a little differently with Kara's parents. Now, it turned out to be an awesome relationship in marriage, but we kind of made things harder on ourselves than we could have through that. So that's a good point. That common vision for marriage, Rachel had a great point, but I think, and Ben, I might be speaking for you, but I think like the idea there is that we're not just dating to have fun. And, we actually have an idea that we're trying to figure this out long term. And that was really helpful. I mean, one of the things that my little disastrous detour relationship, it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that marriage wasn't going to be something that would make a lot of sense with this. And that was one of the reasons it didn't work out. And so that was actually pretty helpful, right? Like to be able to kind of know that. And then that Christ-centered thing that Rachel talked about, we avoided so many problems and got so much grace and figured out so many things because no matter what other kind of stupid stuff we did, we had that as our centerpiece. And so that really helped. So when I talk about, like, when you talk about destructive relationships, you can really screw your life up with a destructive relationship. And so it's not like I'm just like, yeah, go ahead and make any mistake you want. But I think one of the cool things about being Christians we don't think about, I see a lot of times in the world, like people say, well, as Christians, they're repressed and they got all these rules and they can't do all this stuff and things like that. And I actually see it as the exact difference. Those rules allow us to make mistakes that are bruising but not fatal. And so, if you're following a Christian ethic for a relationship, you're trying to care for that other person. You're looking out for that other person. You're trying to build it on something bigger, Christ. And you've got a sexual ethic that keeps you from getting pieces of your soul connected to somebody else without getting a child involved, without getting diseases involved, and without having that kind of pressure. And so what that means is that you can date somebody and then go, oh, this isn't going to be a good deal for marriage. This isn't going to be a good deal long term. And so, yeah, my heart's bruised and it might even be broken a little bit and it kind of hurts and I wouldn't want to do this again. But in the end, there's nothing fatal here. Like, I'm going to recover from that. I can learn from that. I can move on. So that's kind of my take on, like, you know, it's okay to take a few of those wrong paths and go, no, this isn't going to work. No, that's not going to work. Okay, now I definitely know it's going to work because I just tried to it didn't, and I'm a little bit clear. And inside a Christian ethic, you can do that with the, you know, the pain being bruises instead of brokenness. Anyhow, that's my little speech. Kara could probably have said it much more succinctly. Do you have anything to add?
I thought they were all good comments. I think when you are following Christ, then you have a common goal, and that's important. I mean, you want to find things that you have in common in general, but that is the biggest thing that you need to have in common, because that influences the choices that you're making, what your priorities are, what your values are. If you don't have that in common, then you're starting out with a lot of problems. So having that in common is a pretty key thing. I was thinking the comment about the family, I think that's really important. In our situation, we were both away at college. We weren't living close to either of our families. And that made it pretty difficult to have our parents involved and to keep them up on, you know, what was happening. As we became more and more interested in each other, we didn't keep them as up to date maybe as we should have, or, you know, they just weren't seeing it happen. And so they were a little more out of the loop. And so that caused some difficulties there. So that would be probably one thing that I would change if we were to, you know, do something again. I would say that. I think it's important to have family involvement, as well as, you know, I mean, not everyone is living at home, but, you know, friends that you have around, and people have a lot of good wisdom and they can see things that you're not seeing. And so listening to what they're saying and what their concerns may be can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Just a practical aspect of that parenting. We weren't around Kara's parents very much, and Kara's house is much more quiet and peaceful than the one I grew up in, and mine wasn't like abusive or bad. It was just more loud and boisterous. And I didn't, you know, we kind of were in a group of friends and there was a lot of noise and carrying on stuff like that. And it really sounds crazy, but it wasn't until after we married that I realized that Kara interpreted like loud and kind of boisterous as almost as aggressive, you know, like, and like we could have, that would have been an easy thing to figure out with a little more time spent with her family. And so, you know, we had some tough times there early on in our marriage where I was expressing myself at a high volume and Kara thought I was screaming at her in kind of an aggressive way. And she was really hurt. And I was kind of like, what's your problem? Which is not a great response when somebody feels like they're really hurt. And so, like, you know, and that, by the grace of God, we got those things figured out fairly early, and it wasn't a massive crisis, but it was one that would have been a pretty easy one to avoid with just a little bit of observation. You know, just a little bit of time spent. I've been like, oh, this is a little bit of a different culture. And we kind of missed that.
I think that was misspoken a bit. I wouldn't say it was ever loud in an aggressive way, but it was louder than, for example, my parents would have spoken to me and hurt my feelings more, perhaps. Not in an aggressive way at all. No.
Totally. Yeah, I've not routinely yelled at Kara about things, just to be clear.
Totally. And I think that's super cool of talking about the practical side of things. And Jonathan, Kara, you basically answered my next question of, you know, if there's anything you would have done differently. But I think adding to your point, could you talk a little bit about, I guess, the practical side of, for example, a big thing I think that everyone's mentioned is family. For example, my bro's not here, too bad, but just an example of like my friend Josh Shee, he recently married Jordan. It was awesome. But we talked a lot about how Josh comes from an Asian American background. Jordan's family is very Italian American, and how there's like cultural differences. So there is the practical side of, you know, getting to know a family, whatever, you know, it doesn't even have to be kind of a, you know, like cultural difference in that sense, but it could be just families have different cultures and understanding of things, like what you were just talking about, Jonathan. Is there any practical things that you've seen in your story or even other people's stories of how you can observe and how you can, overcome these family differences.
Did you want to start?
So you're specifically talking about families? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So getting to know, like, since we're on family, getting to know each other's families, that seems to be, an important thing for us, but also a hard thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that happens with spending time together. And then also just having some, honest discussions about, hey, this is what I like, or this is what we would do differently, or that sort of thing. And recognizing which things are, really a major issue and which are just things that are different. So one of the funny things that we talked about is Jonathan came and visited my family at Christmas one time. And so my parents, especially my dad, is like real, just kind of, I don't know, more simple and doesn't like to spend a lot of money. And so we cut a white pine Christmas tree that we planted when we were kids. And so we would cut that, we would put beautiful white lights on, we would tie bows, we have a lot of white crocheted snowflakes that my great grandmother made. And so, it was this beautiful tree. We have done pretty much the same thing. It's very peaceful, has family connections, and, but it's, fairly simple. I visited Jonathan's family, and they had like multicolored lights that like blinked randomly, and like every sort of different type of ornament that there was. And
I thought it was natural. Afterwards, I discovered that was the closest thing when we came to her walking away. So.
And I was kind of like just overwhelmed with it. And they also had like, I don't know, 3 black labs, indoor labs, and multiple cats. And, they were running all over the place and wagging their tails and like knocking over the tree. And, for me, growing up in a quieter house, it was very overwhelming. But, that sort of thing, I mean, that deserves a conversation. How are we going to handle this? What are we going to do? But it's not like a major issue as far as, a moral issue. Like, that's just a difference. There's not anything right or wrong. And when you get married, you can make your own decisions on that sort of thing. I mean, there's other issues that arise that, yeah, it's really important that you discuss. If you have a family, thankfully we didn't have this situation, but if you have, a family situation that is not ideal or has some major issues and problems, that's something to talk through and figure out how to avoid that type of problem in your marriage or whatever. So just spending time with each other, getting to know them, being a little open-minded about things that don't really matter tremendously, that are just differences. So,
So I would just say that that's really important that you understand that you're going to form a new family, and that means leaving your old family. And like, you need to leave your old family. You're becoming a new unit and a new identity. And at the same time, you can save yourself a lot of trouble by honoring your family, right? And so, we chose to do things differently from our families, but we honored them in the terms that we respected the decisions they made. We still want relationships with them. And that's turned out to be just tremendous blessings in our lives in all kinds of different ways. But, we made decisions that were different, and we chose to do things our way. And it was really important to kind of have the freedom to do that while still being cognizant of honoring it. The other thing I want to say is, like, some people come from messed up families, and that's not destiny, that's guidance, right? Like, if your family's messed up, first of all of our families are messed up. My family's messed up, Kara's family's messed up. Like, we got blessed with really great parents who did a good job parenting and are married. And so that's a huge advantage. But that's not, but they also came with, they're sinful people too, right? They came with issues and problems and things like that we kind of brought with us. And so, like, if you have that messed up family, it's good to acknowledge that, because you're going to deal with it one way or the other. And so you're going to have to kind of be aware of it. But the cool thing about leaving and becoming your own thing is you don't have to make those mistakes again. Like, you have a chance to start over. And that's what, our faith's all about that, right? Like, you can be born again, and there's redemption, and there's mercy, and there's grace, and you can learn from those things and redeem that pain. You don't have to consistently inherit it and suffer it from it, right? Like, you have to deal with it, but you can redeem it. And so families can be sources of tremendous blessing, and sometimes they can be sources of tremendous pain. And most of us have a little bit of mix of both of those. We pray it's more blessing than pain, but you kind of have to acknowledge both.
Definitely. On this topic of, yeah, just culture and family and all that. Do you guys have any questions for Jonathan or Kara?
How, this is something I was thinking about the other day, how in relationships where you are trying to involve your family more and you're not kind of away at college, like you are sort of living at home more, how would you sort of balance like taking ownership for your own, like this is my relationship, it's not like mom and dad pushing this or something like that, but also like including them in the process, like keeping them more in the loop like you said, but also like taking ownership for it? I don't know, because you guys have like done the kid side and you now are parents, like seeing kind of more what would you want that to look like, or what do you think would be some like healthy hallmarks of that?
That's a really good question, Rachel, and I want to be cautious in answering because there's all kinds of different families, and so I want to try to see if I can stray away from giving specific advice and sort of work on a principle. And I think the principle here is that honoring your parents and receiving the blessing of that relationship means seeking their advice and listening to it closely, right? But preparing for marriage and growing into that also means accepting responsibility for your relationship and acting accordingly. So I don't know how that plays out in every unique situation, but at some point you have to say, you have to in your mind be clear about the fact that I want my parents' advice and I want to seek their guidance and I want to listen to that really, really carefully, because nobody's going to give you better advice than loving parents in this situation. But I'm accepting responsibility to make the final decisions for that relationship, right? Now, that means that your parents are saying no, you can decide yes. So that may not be a wise decision, or may be, depending on the situation. It may have to modify. Maybe it means you disagree. Maybe it means you completely agree. Maybe it means that you have to work some of those things out. But I think just taking the time to think that through and understanding that I'm going to listen to my parents' advice, but they're not driving this relationship. It's my relationship, and I accept responsibility, and therefore I'm going to own the decisions in it. And that's true for all kinds of things about becoming a responsible adult, but it's really important there. And maybe it's easier to see this if you don't do that. If you don't do that, you risk going into a relationship that you've never fully owned and that you've never fully taken responsibility for because you've ceded it to your parents. And even parents who are great and fantastic and have your best interests at heart, they're not, that relationship's not designed for them to have that authority in it. So the sooner you can kind of accept that responsibility, think that through, I think the better you'll be long term. Did I say that? It made sense.
I would say you're making, at the point that you then actually get married, you're making that commitment to that other person, and your parents aren't involved in that. They're not living in your house with you and, mediating and, whatever. It's the two of you that get married. And so you've got to have that relationship with that person directly and be, on the same page there. So yeah, I agree, listening to their advice of your parents, or if you don't have parents that are in the position to, either because of where they live or because of, maybe they don't have the same beliefs, or it's not a good situation, then listening to other, trusted advisors or mentors, or, folks from your church or friends, but particularly people that would have the same beliefs and values as you, that would be able to speak into your life and say, hey, I've noticed this about your relationship. Have you thought of this, or that sort of thing? So, listening to advice from people around you, but particularly ones that would have the same shared values and faith.
Rachel, did that help? Did we answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Just realize even that asking the question will probably get you a lot closer to the answer than even if you can't really give it a formula. So.
Yeah, and Rachel, maybe we just talked about this in Engage Virginia, I'm not sure, but I have learned more and more just in the last year. I have a lot of people who say, how do I avoid this, or how do I not do this, or how do I, deal with this? And I'm taking it more and more often and saying, look, God gives you unique creative imagination and abilities and skills and stuff that nobody else has. And so, it's rare that somebody's going to be able to give you advice and say, just do this. And in fact, if somebody does that, I tend to get really nervous. But instead, if you've got some core principles and you're asking the question, the very fact that you're aware and asking the question is like the best indicator that you're going to find a good answer. Now, what that answer is, I don't know exactly, because it's going to have to be adapted to your specific situation. But just being aware and thinking about it is often 90% of finding the solution. So, and I think that's kind of encouraging, because there's lots of things that you don't know the answers to, but if you just know that you should be seeking them, you're likely to find that you're going to wind up with a good outcome.
Thanks, Rachel. That was really good. Let's take you so many notes just from that stuff. Anyone else? Any other questions? Well, I think that's the perfect segue into my next question, because I love what you just said, Jonathan, about how it's easy to get into that mindset of doing the right thing. This is something I've learned personally of, instead of doing the right thing, it's more about doing things well. It's not just about, how do I avoid doing this? It's about, asking the right questions. But on that, what do you think are some misconceptions about relationships or even marriage that you've seen over the years, especially with a lot of us young, unbound people, all of us getting in relationships?
Well, I think we talked about one earlier. I find a lot of, it seems to be prevalent in the unbound world. I think it's a reaction against a hookup culture, but I think there's people that think that the only way to relationship is to have a perfect relationship with no, like you only date one person and it goes perfect. You have a storybook wedding and all, it's great. And that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's also extremely rare. And so again, if you stay inside the bounds of Christian ethics and the freedom that comes with that, making some mistakes and taking some wrong turns is actually part of the educational process. That's true in every other part of life. I mean, every other part of life requires some failure. So why wouldn't it be true in relationships? So that's one. I think that this is common to everybody, but the idea that you marry somebody and that problems go away, this is going to sound like a really bad analogy, but people say, alcohol won't fix your problems; it'll just make them more intense. Like if you're sad and you start drinking, you're likely to get sadder. If you're mad and you start drinking, you're going to get better. Marriage is a little bit like that in the sense that, if there's a problem before, marriage won't fix it. It'll just sort of magnify it because you'll be in closer proximity to each other all the time. And so that's a good warning at the beginning. And it's a good reminder that we're sinful people. And so we're going to continue to have that sin rub up against each other. And one of the cool things about marriage is that it causes you to confront that earlier. And so that's actually not a problem. That's a feature in some ways, but you have to be prepared for it, right? If you think I'm just going to marry to perfection, and then I can go on for a little bit, but I think I'll just finish one more here. I'm not the person Kara married, and Kara's not the person I married. Like, we've changed significantly over the years. And the key to and that's an inevitable thing. If that doesn't happen, you have a serious developmental problem. Like, you have a real issue with you as a person if you're not changing after you married. And so most people don't think about that. And so one of the key things I think that is really important is that you really commit to changing together, not apart. And so one of the best things that we learned early was that we really put a high commitment on doing things together and pursuing goals together and doing activities together. And what has happened is, as we've changed to become very different people, we've changed to become different people who have a lot of the same interests. And so we've changed in a lot of ways that are mutually helpful and beneficial, instead of kind of branching off and going different directions. And so those are some things that I think, well, I guess the last one is that, I forget who said this earlier, maybe it was Emma, that love is a choice. I mean, it's not a feeling. It's not something that you have no control over. You choose to love. And that is sometimes a hard choice, but it's always a good choice, and it winds up being such a more authentic love than some sort of emotional butterfly. So that was a lot. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I would say one of the commitment is, as well. And it's all fun and games and exciting when you're dating and you're learning new and exciting things about each other. But it's important to not forget to continue to do that after you get married. Like, continue to talk about all sorts of things with each other and continue to find things that you like to do together. And it doesn't mean that you never do things separately. I mean, you still may have some separate hobbies, but I think if you have a couple where one is off playing golf all the time and the other one's spends all her time shopping or whatever, and you're not spending time together, I think that's a problem. So a lot of your primary interests should be shared, and find things that you both enjoy doing, and explore and do things like that you're enjoying together. So.
Which is why having a shared faith is such a great advantage, because like instantly the most important thing in life is shared, and you continue to grow in that together. And so that just gives you like this instant built-in advantage in terms of growing together instead of apart. And I think that's a really cool advantage. I'm kind of running too long, so sorry if you caught me after Engage Virginia where I spoke a lot, so now I'm like in speaker mode. But
this is good. Please don't apologize.
I hear a lot of people like they're really worried about, how can I be committed to this person for life, and will it always last and stuff like that. And I just want to kind of put a huge endorsement here and say, like, Kara and I, it's not the same as when we were first dating. And that's really good, because I couldn't handle that adrenaline rush my whole life, right? Like that dating part was fun, and it was great to have the butterflies and the weak knees and stuff like that. But man, I'm really glad that that didn't last forever, right? I don't think I could have handled it. And so in that sense, like, the honeymoon's over. But what happens is that it doesn't go stale like the culture tells you. Instead, it deepens and richens, it gets richer and wider, and there's so much more depth. And so, yes, some of the adrenaline goes away, but what's there instead is so much fuller and so much bigger and so much more valuable that you don't notice the adrenaline loss, right? Like that's done right, it keeps getting better. You hear the cliche, like, I'm more in love today than when we were married. Well, that's true, but it's a different kind of love, but it's a richer, deeper, more important love. And it's the kind of love that when things go wrong and tragedies strike and life sucks, that is irreplaceable. No butterflies can help then. No adrenaline's useful then. And it's the rich kind of like, every day my life is better because I get to share it with you. Like, what good days is better, a bad day's not as catastrophic, a challenge is easier, a fun time's better. Like, there's a deep, rich, lasting joy and, I don't know, awesomeness that comes from committing for the long haul. And sometimes I just wish I could tell people, like, look, yes, there's work, and yes, there's some of that stuff you got to do, but man, the payoff is like so exponentially bigger than the work that it's worth every second of whatever you got to put into it that way.
Yeah. On this subject of commitment, if we're talking more about the relationship side of things, I think that's a tricky season of, you're preparing for marriage. If you're in a relationship, hopefully you're with someone who you're hoping to, start a family with and develop this deeper love. But what are some practical ways that you think you can develop this kind of commitment or deeper understanding without overstepping? Because I know from hearing a lot of people, or even from experience, of how, you can be very good friends with someone. If you're dating, you could even be hopefully you're best friends, right, with your significant other. But, before marriage, it's also tricky to find that balance of, not committing too much emotionally, or, stepping in an area that should be developed after marriage. Is there a practical pointer that you've seen of how to be wary of that. Does that make sense?
I think, but let me restate the question. So I think you're asking, like, how do you practice and build that commitment without overcommitting too soon? Is that, did I make that too simple? Was that kind of, or do you have more to it?
I think that's a good way of summarizing it. I think that all of us, most of us here, I believe, are Christian. I think a lot of us grew up in a Christian family, so we're very blessed to have a good worldview on, marriage and dating. But I think a lot of us struggle with finding, when we're actually in doing this, it's finding the balance of what that looks like practically, and again, the commitment.
So, first of all, I'm going to say something that's probably not as useful and helpful, because it's going to be like, yeah, great, that sounds fantastic in theory, but how do I actually do that? And the answer is, I don't know. You have to figure it out yourself. That's kind of part of the thing. But like, there ought to be a sliding scale of commitments where, you start out as kind of interested in some person in a group setting, and then kind of interested, and then you have some conversations and you get kind of more committed. At some point, you're kind of officially dating. And then, in that dating process, you share more and more, and your relationship deepens and deepens, and the commitment becomes deeper and deeper, right? Like, that you want it to kind of slide along that. And I don't know what the perfect formula for that is. I just know that if that reverses at some point, that's a really good indicator that things aren't going well, right? Like, if it's not sort of naturally progressing, you ought to step back and say, is it not naturally progressing because I'm stalling it for some reason, in which case I need to commit to the relationship a little more? I need to work on it. Or is it not working because we're not connecting well? And if it's the latter, do I need to think of something different? Or if it's the former, do I need to just make an adjustment, right? So, yeah, and I know that that's a little bit less than helpful, because that's not a formula, but I think that's a good observation. Like, a healthy relationship will gradually grow more committed in a somewhat natural fashion. And if it doesn't, you should probably pause and scratch your head and spend some time trying to figure out why that is. Does that make sense, Abe?
Yeah, I think so.
I think sometimes these questions are sitting there and people are asking them, and then everybody just doesn't want to talk about it. And so I guess as I've gotten older, I've gotten less concerned about being awkward, so brace yourself. But Kara's like, I'm leaving now. Look, here's one of these other really interesting advantages that's hard for the world to see about a Christian ethic. And when we talk about a Christian ethic, one of the hallmarks of that is that, Christ calls us, God has a commandment that says you only have sex with the person you're married to. So sex is out before you're married. And the world says that's a big problem, right? Well, here's this interesting kind of fascinating thing about that. Sex binds people together. And that's why it's such a potent, wonderful thing inside of marriage, right? It's a really great way to connect a couple. But, as everybody's discovered, culture's discovered, it's a great way to bind a couple with or without a ring, right? And so one of the interesting freedoms that comes, and one of the interesting advantages that comes from a Christian ethic, is that that sex before marriage provides a shortcut to a connection that then covers over a multitude of problems, and then leads to a multitude of problems, because those problems don't go away. They fester there and get infected, right? And so one of the cool things is, if you commit to this ethic about not sleeping together before you're married, then you lose that most potent connection tool. And that's great, because then you have to really work at the commitment side of things, and at the relational side of things, and the communication side of things. And you have to really test and make sure that you're connected on all those levels. And then the reward for that is the intimacy that comes after your vows. And that ends up being this just phenomenal advantage, because if you can practice the self-discipline and you can practice the self-control to do that, then you'll have to rely on really getting to know the other person well at a deep level and at a real level. And then that pays off in really great marriage in a whole bunch of ways, including intimacy after your vows. And so that's sort of a weird way to answer the commitment thing, but it's more of an encouragement to think that, like, hey, this is kind of set up in such a way that if you're following this Christian prescription for dating and you're following these rules, that it's going to lead you to really have to work hard at connecting to that person at all the right levels. And if you continue to find yourself more and more committed to each other, then that's a really good indicator that you're really well suited to each other, and that's a really strong base to build a marriage on. I hope that all flowed together and made sense. Was I sounding mostly rational?
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
No, but yeah, I think that made sense. Any other thoughts from you guys that you want to add, or any questions on that?
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep. Go for it.
This is my brother, Ben. There was an issue, so we were doing this on the same account. But my brother's been writing down some questions here just about different topics. Is it okay if we kind of have an open discussion?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and stop you there. As soon as you picked up the microphone, it went mute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I think we lost it.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Really? Is it back? Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
So don't touch the cord.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So, like I was saying, I've listened to a lot of stuff about relationships. Some Christian, from some kind of worldly sources. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the movement called MGTOW. That's MGTOW. Stands for Men Going Their Own Way, and it all comes from what I can tell, starting a relationship with sex out of marriage, then wondering why it falls apart afterwards. And because of the system and society we live in, a lot of these men get burned, and they blame women, they blame the system, instead of going for the root cause of the problem, which is a lack of commitment. And I guess my question is, how do you foster a permanent commitment, and how can we avoid some of the pitfalls of the world as we do live in a society that allows for and almost promotes divorce between couples? We have a huge percentage of couples who are divorced after only a few years. How can we set up a foundation that is permanent, that's righteous before God?
So there's kind of a lot of different things in there. I got MGTOW stuff in that. One of those things that was quoted as that shooter in LA a couple of years back had a problem, and it was connected to all that stuff. But so this is going to be a funny answer. This is going to sound a little weird, but I just listened to a podcast on investing not that long ago, and the guy said something that I've been kind of pondering a little bit. It's kind of interesting. He said, the more complicated something is, the more important it is to have a simple solution. That seems kind of counterintuitive, but he said something like investing in the stock market is infinitely complicated. And experience will show that the more complicated a formula somebody has to do that, the worse they end up doing long term. Whereas somebody like a Warren Buffett, who has a couple of very simple rules and follows them religiously, does very well. And I think that, not to oversimplify your questions or smush it all together, but yeah, there's all kinds of complicated cultural, societal issues of our day that make all these things just seem really complicated. But it's not. It requires some simple solutions that we follow religiously. And we ought to be pretty good at that as people of faith, right? Like that, Jesus took the law and kind of said, love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And ultimately, that's the heart of every relationship. And, if you're kind of having trouble discerning what that looks like, then, the cool thing is, I just heard another podcast where Rick Warren was saying that on a Sunday in America, more people are attending church on any given Sunday than attend professional sports events for the entire year. And so, at some level, that means that there's a lot of Christians out there. There's a lot of people who are practicing this, loving their neighbor as themselves, and love the Lord God, the Lord God, and soul. And if you're having trouble sort of figuring it out, go find a place in a community that has those things and sort of observe for a while and catch it by osmosis. Because ultimately, I don't think you have to be really intelligent or really deeply relationally successful to look around and say, that looks like a big disaster. And that looks a little better. Yeah, like that looks like something a little better. And then from there on, I think simple solutions are actually a lot easier than trying to find some complicated answer to a societal mess. Love Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do that as best as you can, and transfer that to a relationship with another person. Seek to serve them and to love them as well as you can. And I think most of us have built into us a series of relational skills that will manifest themselves and help guide you through that process. There's mistakes you can make. There's some obvious ones to avoid. Nobody's going to be able to give you a complete prescription and roadmap, but a couple of principles like that and some commitment, and you can be pretty doggone good. So, you want to add to that?
I would say commitment and communication. Jonathan and I probably walked, I don't know how many miles, pretty much every night when we were dating in college. I mean, multiple miles, many, many nights. And to some extent, and maybe it's not quite every night now, but we walk a lot of time, many times along the river behind our house. We've solved a lot of problems, in our family, or just discussions about problems in the world or whatever else, So I think communication is a big deal. And it's also, back to what you were saying, love. It's how you treat. Your spouse should be treated with love, as much or more than you treat others. And so don't forget that. That's an important thing, I think. And I guess trust would be another thing. I would say that's an important thing, like, especially once you're married, your loyalty is to your spouse. And that's where we go back to the discussion with the family. Your family is still important. You still honor them. But it's not a good situation when you're, going home to your parents and complaining about annoying things that your husband does or that your wife does or whatever, like, keep that relationship sacred. Don't be complaining about different things to all your friends or whoever. Like, that becomes your primary relationship, between people. Obviously, then you have your spiritual relationship with God, which, would continue to be the key thing. But especially when that's shared, you're striving towards that together as a couple. That's a really powerful thing. But having that trust there, you can discuss many things and have that trust there, can solve a lot of problems.
All right, and if I can add just one more thing, I've always thought it was strange, but do you think that Christians should involve the government in marriage? I know that obviously you have legal marriages, and it gives you some advantages in like taxation and things along those lines. But do you think that Christians should lean more towards having a commitment with a single person before God, or do you think it's beneficial to involve the marriage in that, and the government in that relationship?
So that might get, that sounds like a really interesting topic. It's probably a little far field for the topic of this call, but so I don't know that I really want to get into it much. I would just say that government has a really strong interest in marriage, because marriage is the foundation of society. And so anything that forms such a basic building block, it's the best way to care for children, and every society needs to have another generation. And so certainly government has some interest in that, and how much and how, where, and all that kind of stuff could be a fascinating discussion, but probably not one that A, I'm equipped to deal with really intelligently, and B, probably not the specific focus of this call. So anyhow, but if you're coming to Apex, you can catch me late at night sometime, and we can have a really interesting discussion about it. So.
All right, thank you.
Good question.
Good point. You should be at Apex. But on that, okay, so anyone else have any questions? I kind of had something to add to that, but before I go on.
Yeah, I did have one question, unrelated to any of the previous ones, but and you guys can use your discretion to include or exclude as many details as you would like. But was there a situation in your marriage where something drove a wedge in between you guys, and you guys had to work around that and restore that relationship, or possibly something or someone that you guys had to work together to restore the relationship after a period where you guys had that wedge in between you guys? So just some wisdom for that, and how would you recommend dealing with that?
Take a little mic mute thing to make sure that we're on the right page here. So Ben, that's a really cool question, and so it's a really good one. So let me take a stab at it in two different directions and let Kara fix it. So the first is, Kara alluded to this a little bit earlier, but one really massive blessing that we inherited from both of our parents, and that we've really managed to make it, is that we've really committed to always publicly affirming each other in every way, shape, or form. And I don't mean like cover up and lie or something like that, but like to really publicly respect and cover each other. So I've never been in a situation where Kara's going to her friends and saying, "You would not believe what Johnson did." And Kara's never been in a situation where I'm going to a bunch of friends saying, "Yeah, my wife is driving me crazy." It's amazing how much trust is built up over the years, right? Like there's no chance for a wedge to kind of get started when you're committing to always saying positive things about your spouse. Now, we both have close relationships with people that we can sort of check in on our marriages with other folks. Like, it's good to get some outside perspective. We can be honest about stuff like that. But, as a rule, we're a united team. And so there's nothing comes in there. We have a couple other things that we do to make sure that we kind of are committed to each other. And that includes things like making sure we have the same shared interests and we're doing things together and we are including each other. We're communicating, and I'm telling Kara what's going on. She's telling me what's going on, stuff like that. That being said, the one person that came between us in our marriage came from an unexpected source, and that was us. We had Anna Lee, and some of you know Anna Lee. And if you know Anna Lee, she's a charming, wonderful, fantastic little bundle of joy. And she grew into that because she came out as a very uncharming, grumpy, extremely highly aggravating and high maintenance little baby. And so she came after Kara's most difficult pregnancy up to that point. It ended C-section, so Kara had a really long recovery. And she was just a grump, and she hated me. I was actually really well connected to all of her other kids as babies, and Annalie had no interest in me whatsoever. She liked Kara, and then she liked my mother-in-law, and then she liked Caitlin, and then she liked Caleb, and then she could barely tolerate me until she was like 2. And I don't know what I did to her. And so Annalie just took a ton of work. And of course, we had 5 other kids, and they still required some maintenance as well. And it was slow and invisible and insidious. And bit by bit, we just drifted, man. Like we were just not talking. We were exhausted. We were grumpy because Annalie was always screaming in our ear. And we didn't really feel like we could leave her with anybody because she was just a pain. And like we loved her. And like I'm getting,
you're being a little overly dramatic.
Kara's getting ready to smack me, but actually that was the point. That was very much my honest assessment of it. Kara had a different assessment of it, right? This is a sweet little baby that was her daughter. And it's not that I didn't love Annalie. I just found it really difficult. And we got to a point that we actually went to the beach and we took a walk, and we were like, you know what? We're closer to a crisis than we've ever been, and it snuck up on us. It kind of blindsided us, and we had to really work at prioritizing one another and communicating and fixing some things and adjusting and coming back. And it wasn't a snap process. It was a multiple week and month kind of reconnecting. We ended up at closer than we've ever been, but it was interesting looking back. Like, it can come from an unexpected source, right? Something that distracts, something that keeps you from keeping that commitment, from keeping those lines of communication open, something that gives you a different set of priorities. And it's easy to sort of wind up in a place where you're like, who is this person that I'm sharing a life with? I all of a sudden don't know them anymore.
It was just kind of a subtle distraction. You know, we were just getting so distracted with, you know, the day in and day out requirements of other things, and didn't realize we had kind of let that slide instead of, you know, keeping that as a priority.
So to give you a happy story, ending the story, you know, we got it figured out, and Anna Lee has outgrown almost all of those problems. And if you've met her, I don't think you'll recognize my description of her, but and we have made up. She actually likes me now, so I think we've got a pretty good relationship.
I wouldn't say we have her quite figured out, but
yeah, that's true. But yeah, so good question, Ben, and we learned a lot from that kind of surprising ambush. So.
All right, well, thank you very much.
All right, I'm not sure if there's any like lag going on, and I'm like totally interrupting someone because our Wi-Fi here is crud beyond belief. But I do have a question. If we're at a place for a question, so
it's really interesting. It sounds like Jared, but it looks like Megan. This kind of throw me off. So.
Megan had some work on her vocal. Come on, whatever. No. How have you guys fostered community? Vice versa.
Yeah, you might have to turn your video off because we can't hear you. It's breaking up, buddy.
Yeah. All right, Jared. Can you repeat the question? Thank you.
How have you guys built community for each other? Like, for instance, Jonathan, how have you helped Kara build a community, and then vice versa?
Well, we imported these crazy people to Virginia, and it's never quite been the same since.
Well, we've chosen to become really involved with our church, which has been a major part of our community. I think another way that I would consider to be part of our community as a whole is just the fact that the whole Unbound community has been welcoming to our whole family, not just Jonathan. And so that's been a big part of us being excited about, you know, Jonathan's job and the students that he talks with and people that he meets with. It's been a huge deal for us to be able to be involved and able to come to Apex and that sort of thing. So that's definitely a big part of our community as well. Yeah, just spending time with, getting to know people that you know, that we meet. So guys that Jonathan hangs out with, getting together sometimes with, you know, their wives or families, or, you know, that sort of thing. Just spending time together.
Yeah, and I might add that prioritizing seeking community. I think one of the things that we observed and learned pretty early was that we weren't as smart as we thought we were. At least I knew that. I think Kara was always a little more aware than I was. And so putting ourselves in situations where we could grow close enough to people who could provide corrective to us in a way that helped, that was constructive, was comfortable, was really important. So Jared, to kind of answer that question, is that we have aggressively sought to build community wherever we are, in whatever way we could, so that we had other people around us that we could look to as examples and as peers and as people we could talk to and bounce things off of, and we could see our reflection in them, and it helped us to kind of stay a good course. So when we graduated from college, we didn't have a good church home. We were still looking, and so we started a Bible study in our home, invited a bunch of people who graduated from college that still lived in our area, and we did that for several years. And we still can't stay connected with some of those people. And then we really tried hard to find a church, and we found a church. We made that our big commitment. And then as we started to find holes, like as I got to the point where I realized I didn't have a lot of, you know, like we had a good work community at the college for a while. And so we really committed to those people, and we hung out with a lot of them. And then when I realized I didn't have as much of that anymore because I was working remote, you know, we started a men's group and did that. And I was a part of those things. And then Kara started going to a women's fellowship at the church, and, you know, those kinds of things. So we've just kind of, it's one of those things that if you're asking the question, you're going to find the answer. We've really decided that it's really essential that we surround ourselves with people that can reflect ourselves back and make sure that we're on the right path. And I don't know what that looks like everywhere, but it's just for us, it's meant constantly looking for that opportunity. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
So we got I think Dylan just posted a comment that I got to read, so give me a second here.
Sure. I'll just read it out loud for anyone else who can't see it. So Dylan's question is, backing up pre-relationship. So we have a lot of discussion in the forums community about starting relationships, sorry. Some think only the guy should start a relationship. Some feel that the girl can also start the relationship. Thoughts? Also, it seems many times there is hesitation in starting a relationship with someone because of many relationships, at least starting long distance, especially in this community. Any thoughts on this?
You get to go first.
I would say starting with a friendship is really important, because that way you're just getting to know that person. I think that's really important. Starting out, spending time together, working on a project together. I think why it's so important. I mean, a lot of relationships in the community have started when people have worked on teams together. And I think when you have a common goal that you're working on, that just kind of draws people together. You get a chance to see that other person in action, see their strengths, see their weaknesses, and learn more about that person. So I think that's a good way to start.
So Dylan, you asked, some think that only a guy should start a relationship. Some feel that a girl can also start a relationship. Thoughts about that? I'm going to confess to you that I don't know that I have a hard, fast one. So I'm just going to throw some things out there. I think that, there's sort of a traditional Christian ethic of some kind, certainly in conservative circles, that a guy can start a relationship or should start a relationship. And I think in some ways that can be healthy. It makes the guy prove some courage. It takes some emotional courage to risk rejection and to ask. And so as a girl, that's kind of a nice test to see if he's got enough guts to do that. But I also think it's worth acknowledging that we're in a complicated social society. Like there's a lot of different things going on, and that sometimes some adjustments need to take place. And so, sometimes it may be necessary for somebody to ask a prompting question or to kind of push things around a little bit. And I've seen it work all those different ways. So I don't know that I've got a hard answer for that. But I think that what I would say is to go back to what Kara said earlier, that almost always when I see problems with whoever starts a relationship, whoever asks it, it's because there wasn't a base of friendship first and sort of mutual understanding. And so often somebody's going a little quick, right? Like whether it's a girl, whether it's a guy, they're kind of asking a question before the other person's like emotionally prepared to understand what's going on. And so I think my best answer is to just come back with what Kara said, that the more you can find times to build a friendship together, and especially in some sort of group or team setting, the easier it will be to then transition into something more, no matter who sort of prompts that. Oh, and you said hesitation to start a relationship with someone because of long distance. No, there's no doubt long distance is challenging, but man, I always think about this. I was dating Kara, and we were at school, so we were living together and not living together, but living on the same campus. And so we could be a little careful there. And so we could see each other often. And then we spent a summer apart, and I was just kind of depressed because I had to spend a whole summer apart so we get. And the guy I was working for listened to me whine about it for a couple minutes, and then he just quietly said, he says, "Yeah, Sarah and I started dating, and then we got married, and we got married on a Monday, and I got deployed on a Tuesday, and then I spent 7 years in every ship that served in the Pacific in World War II, and then I came home." And he just kept right on painting. We're painting a house, and I was smart enough to realize that I was being a whiny little brat and should just really keep my mouth shut. And the point there is that long distance is not new. And long distance requires some special skills, but also some special opportunities. And man, we've got some crazy technology that makes long distance a lot easier. So if you think long distance is like kind of the excuse, that's probably because you haven't got a chance to know somebody well enough. And maybe you got to close the distance to do that and come to an event or go visit or do something. But you know, if you've got the commitment to do that, I don't think long distance is a particular impediment.
So. It's a great way to work on your relationship and communication skills.
And I would actually, if I can add, not just with romantic relationships, but with lots of relationships in the community, I've seen people, because it's long distance, yes, it's more painful and hard and it's not as fun, but the relationships are more lasting because they're started intentionally and people have to pursue them. So with any long distance relationship, there's already commitment at the beginning, and that just sets it up for more success and longevity.
Yeah, I think it's well spoken, Emma. And I just add that you should adopt the student life mantra here is that I don't believe any relationship can be really authentic online unless it leads to live. And if it's going to be live, then I think we live in a day and age where we've got cool technology, so we ought to be able to keep it going online, right? And so I think that's a pretty good thing to know for any friendship, romantic or otherwise, right? Like there has to be a live component to it. The more the better. But you know, some of that's impossible to keep up all the time. And so if you're meeting somebody online, make sure you're driving to some live interaction. And then once you have that live interaction, use this cool technology that we've been given in our day and age and keep it up. So that's how we can talk to all y'all.
Yeah. Actually, on that point of long distance, if I could add a question real quick. So a lot of us happen to be long distance and unbound. It's just the nature of things. And how can we love and support our significant other when we are not we can't physically be there to say help them or even comfort them. A lot of times it's about just praying for them. And is there any pointers on how you can pray for your significant other, or even how to support them when you're long distance?
I think just even like a quick phone call or text or email or something like that, just saying, hey, I saw this today and thought of you, or hey, I was thinking of you and prayed for you, or just little comments or things like that. I mean, that is helpful in person, close relationships as well. Just knowing that you're in their thoughts and prayers and on their mind, that they haven't forgotten about you. I think just little things like that. Doesn't have to be something expensive. You don't have to send huge bouquets of flowers or whatever. Just, if it's somebody nearby and you just, stop and pick some wildflowers on the way home and say, hey, I saw these and, thought of you, or something like that. If it's long distance and you send a quick text or say, hey, I saw this and thought of you, or this brought you to mind, just so that they know that you're thinking of them.
So that last part about how praying for them, I think is really important. I think it's Victoria Grant's on the call, and Victoria does this thing that I think is really cool. Victoria often, I hear her ask people, and I've been asked by her, hey, how can I pray for you? And that's an interesting little question that really hits deep, in that, it's kind of easy to say, I'll be praying for you. And it's like, yeah, well, will you really, or do you remember, or do you even know what to pray for? But when you ask somebody, how can I pray for you? It causes that person to really reflect and say, well, I mean, this person is going in the throne room of heaven to intercede for me in front of the God who made everything. I should probably take advantage of this and say what's really going on. Like here you could really pray. We've been really blessed recently, so give thanks for us. Or we're really struggling, so help us. And so, that's a pretty cool thing to ask your significant other, long distance or otherwise. It's a great discipline to pray together. It would be a really cool discipline to consistently ask what the other person, what you should pray for. That would reveal a lot of pretty interesting things, and also give you a really cool basis to come before God about. Thanks for joining, Wyatt. You probably get the long distance reward again.
Yeah, it's good to see you on, brother. Yeah, that was solid, Jonathan. I just wanted to kind of open it up too, because I know a lot of you guys on here are long distance relationship or, things like that. Any practical thoughts on this of like how to really pray for each other or even help each other in long distance? Any thoughts?
You were up next. Was that directed to us or everybody, Abe? Sorry.
I was directing that to everyone else. So
that's what I thought.
If anyone else has any thoughts or
not really anything that Kara didn't really cover as far as the communication thing. Just I guess just from personal experience, I have found that a lack of communication can really burn you in the long run, particularly in those relationships. So yeah, and sometimes clarity in that communication, just because when I'm talking to you face to face, you can get a sense of my tonality, where I'm coming from, and what I meant by what I said in the context. And so just, very clear communication and frequent two very important things. So.
Yeah, you should listen to Ben. He's probably the expert here on that at the moment. So I was thinking, you said that, Ben, I thought of something. I work remote. And man, I'm embarrassed to tell you how many times I've gotten a Slack message or Skype or email that has got my stomach twisted in knots, had me worried sick, sometimes over a weekend, over a day, over some perceived problem at work, often coming from a boss or sometimes a colleague or somebody from the department, only to have a phone call with them and in 2 minutes realize I had no idea what's going on and there's not a problem. And in fact, I can't remember more than maybe one time when there actually was a real problem, and that real problem was solvable. And so one thing I just say is that, and this sounds like an old man thing, so I apologize, but like I run into a lot of people who would rather text than talk, and they feel safer texting, and they can think about it in texting, and they can reflect on it. And I'm not saying don't ever text. I send lots of texts, and Karen and I text. But I'm just saying that it is a really lousy substitute for even an old-fashioned phone call, let alone a video call, right? And so if you're serious about building a long-distance relationship with anybody, just please don't think that texting is really communication, and that it's going to help you build any kind of lasting communication structure that's going to be really valuable. I'm not saying you can never text each other. I'm just saying it's a stopgap communication tool, not a relational building communication tool. So, do whatever it takes to get on the phone call and have a real live voice, or better yet, use a camera and do a face-to-face call, something like that.
Yeah, and that's another thing that Jonathan mentioned, was just the technology. It's so much easier now. Daisy and I talk pretty much every single day with apps that I never even heard of before we started distance relations. So there's a lot of stuff out there for communication purposes. So
yeah, agree. Any other thoughts on that?
I'm not sure if y'all have already talked about this since I hopped on like 30 minutes ago, but watching my sisters and brothers, like I think all of them did long distance at some point. But one thing that was fun with that I noticed with my older sisters was that they're all intentionally consistent with communication. And so they had a phone because my brother-in-laws were on completely different like cell services. So they had to have a different phone, I guess, for some reason. I don't know. I was 8. But, but they all had a phone that they just consistently talked to each other with. And it was a little like flip phone. And they just scheduled a time every night, I think, to chat about life and the day and what they're reading about in the Bible and everything. And I always thought that was kind of cool because it was just like, this is my lifeline to the person that I'm pursuing. And it was just a good physical, reminder of that. But, yeah, being consistent is really smart.
Yeah, Angie, you've had a front row seat. You could probably write a book that would be pretty helpful on all this relational stuff. So
I could. I was normally the one being smooth since I was the little 8-year-old, so I was happy as long as they got me cookies and I don't know, took me to the Alamo. So I liked them.
We're not waiting for the
Basically,
book,
if you brought a dog with you when you came to meet the family, I liked you. I would kick my brother out in favor of you.
So, guys, there's some tips. Angie, I think the book should be called A Little Sister's Guide to Relationships. So
there you go. Like it. I'll do it. It'll be 3 pages.
Cool. So also on this, we mentioned how like starting relationships. So for a lot of us, we're not in a relationship at the moment, and so kind of also to close things out. Can you speak on how for a lot of us, I think there's some obvious pointers that we all know about, looking for someone, and there's the big, principles where thank God we've been trained well. We know about, looking for another believer, looking for someone who meshes well. But again, on the practical side of things, Jonathan and Kara, is there anything that those of us who aren't in a relationship yet, are single, should be actively looking for? And kind of moving along, if we are in a dating relationship, what kind of helps confirm that, all right, this is something where we can, take into the next level to engagement or marriage?
So your first part was, if you're not in a dating relationship, what are some advice and things like that? And
yeah, it's a big question. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm just kind of like, so I'm just gonna say, if you're in that situation, man, I really sympathize, because I had a really great friend growing up, and he was always dating somebody, and I was always trying to date this girl, and it never worked out. And I just was like, what is wrong with you? Like, my whole life is just gonna be like this. And it just felt like, really, until I met Kara, everything felt like a freaking disaster, and that I'd never figured things out, and I'd just be an idiot for life, right? Like, and so I remember still to this day how absolutely complicated the whole stupid thing felt, and like how it just never seemed like it was ever going to work. And then it did, right? And I don't want to like say like, and so you just follow this formula. I just want to sort of hold that out and say that, for most people it works, right? I mean, like, and so, and there is a period in there where you're kind of like, what is going on? And so here's some things that I would just sort of keep in mind. The first is, working on your relationship with God is number one. And so, and Amy sort of said, yeah, we know that, right? But, there are unique things to learn about God, and there's unique things to figure out about God that being single gives you the opportunity to do. And so don't waste that opportunity. The second thing is move, do something with your life. The more you sit around wishing for somebody, the less attractive you are to somebody. And so really, really focus on, moving forward in whatever it is that you're doing. Find something constructive, service-minded, or whatever to do, and whether that's career or service or ministry or whatever. But doing something is really important. The third would be go where there are people, right? I mean, like, you don't go fishing in a desert. And so, it seems simple, but like, if you're not in a place where there are prospective folks, make some life changes to get to that place. And whether that's a temporary thing, where you're going on a trip or going to an activity or something like that, or whether it's more permanent, either way, like, acknowledge that reality. Like, God works in all kinds of ways, and God may send somebody to you, but that's the Emma. But like, if you need to go where there are people. And the fourth thing is, I find that people think, and for those of you who are just engaged, Virginia, I'm sorry for hitting this propaganda twice, but people think that relationships are just, because you do them, you're just instantly good at them. And because everybody does them, it's just a normal thing, and that you have a gift. I sometimes joke and say American males think that because they're American, they ought to be able to shoot guns. And my experience is that most of them have no idea what they're doing. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, because I'm alive and have friends, I must be good at relationships. Relationships is a skill. And so, find ways to practice and build your skill. Read good books about it. Listen to podcasts about it and practice. And I mean practice by like being with people of all ages and generations and stuff like that. Like, the more you do that, the more you'll build those relational skills, the more attractive you'll become, the more you put yourself in proximity of folks, and the more that possibility becomes real. So, there's actionable things that you can do. And so it's sort of it's a form of active waiting. You're gonna have to wait. It's in God's hands, but use that time wisely. And in doing so, you're likely to see results.
My answer was pretty similar. I actually scribbled down a couple of notes, and turns out they were almost all the same points that Jonathan had. But I would say, again, like, work on your relationship with God and relationships with others. I think that's really important. And just working on improving skills at whatever. Keep learning, keep doing stuff. Find ways to serve. I mean, just enjoy the life that you're living now. Like, wherever you are right now, like, just spend that time doing something that's important, that, developing skills that you may want in the future. Serve God wherever you are. Don't be super caught up in, becoming desperate to find, the right person, because in my observation, just watching some folks around me when I was in college and other places, like, people that had that kind of desperate vibe, we're not attracting the right sort of people for sure. And it kind of just turned people off. So just be comfortable with who you are, have fun, and just don't waste your time. Like, do something important with your life, and just wait for the right timing.
So one other thought to that, and this is kind of recently, is that don't be afraid to pray specifically. And what I mean by that is that I found that I've spent a lot of my time praying, "Oh Lord, let your will be done," and being very self-righteous about thinking that was a great prayer. Until I read a book and a friend pointed out that was awful kind of me for me to give God permission to do his will. And he was being a little flippant, but there was something pretty barbed about that, like, importance. Like, I just read a book by Don Eldredge that says, the reason you get general, unspecific answers to your prayers is because you pray general, unspecific prayers. And so don't be afraid to step out in faith and pray for some specific help and guidance. And that doesn't mean like God just send me somebody. That might be God reveal to me what I need to do to become ready for a relationship. Reveal the weaknesses that I need. Reveal that, show me what I need to work on, and then guide me to be the right place where I can meet some folks. Like those kinds of, pray constructively and specifically. And then Abe, your second question was, if you're dating, what should you know? And I think I put it this way. Some of you have owned dogs, and there's this kind of rules about puppies. Puppies do things that are cute. And I grew up with a bunch of Labradors, and we trained a bunch of Labs. And one of the things about training a Labrador is it's like, you don't let the puppy do something that's cute as a Labrador puppy that you wouldn't want to do as a full-grown Labrador dog. So a Labrador puppy that jumps up on the couch in your lap is really cute, but a Labrador full-grown dog that jumps up in your lap on the couch is a major pain and hard on the couch. A puppy that bites your fingers is kind of cute, but a Lab that bites your fingers requires you to sew them back on. That's not cute at all. And like, you don't get, a little puppy that jumps up on you is cute. A Lab that jumps up on you knocks you flat and gets mud all over everything. And so you don't let that stuff happen. Like, you train at an early age, you train that out of it. So if you're dating now, keep in mind that this is a unique opportunity to lock in foundational behaviors that will be with you the rest of your married life. And so be aware that whatever the pattern you're following, if you're following a pattern of lying and being dishonest to each other and, putting each other down or whatever it is, even if it looks cute, even if it looks funny, you're building a pattern for life. If you are building a pattern of building each other up and seeking Christ together and serving one another and communicating well, you're building a pattern for life. And so there's a unique opportunity to really lay that foundation now. And like Kara said earlier, don't waste that. Don't be too anxious to sort of rush to the next stage. Go ahead and take the time to lay those foundations.
Very cool. Any thoughts
Can
on
I,
that?
going off of that?
Go for it, Rachel.
You're talking about some of the skill sets and like find ways to learn these skill sets. Sometimes I find like it's easier, like people write more books and talk more, something like that, like the tangible skill sets, like, you know, whether it's like, oh, you need to know how to balance a checkbook, or like girls, you need to know how to make dinner, or so, or like, I don't know, guys, you need to like have a job, like whatever. People write books about this kind of stuff. But like, what are some like the emotional or like relational, less tangible skill sets that you would want to be growing in? And how do you kind of go more about that? I mean, some of them I guess are general enough. Like, I don't know if you thought there were any particular ones that it was like, this is a huge relational skill set that I found out was really valuable in marriage, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I would say one of the things that I thought would be an important skill, I know, especially in the community, there's a lot of talk about the different personality types, whether it be like the Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or that sort of thing. But one thing that I think we found helpful is the different love languages. That's a book that we had read that just talked about different ways that people express love and, you know, feel loved, which I don't know if I can remember all of them, but, you know, like giving gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, you know, different things like that. And just some reading about those different types of ways to show love to others. And that was pretty fascinating. I would say just, you know, again, communication, just learning to communicate and practicing that. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Rachel. Like emotional skill sets and what are some emotional skills that think that we learn? I'm with Kara that communication has obviously been kind of the linchpin, you know, that's held a lot of stuff together. I think this is going to sound, you said there's a lot of things about reading books about teaching how to do stuff. Maybe I'll speak to somebody who thinks the same thing. I had this bad attitude about this when I got married. I was kind of like, my parents have a great marriage. Kara said her parents have a great marriage. We had a great dating relationship. I have great friends. No problem. I got this. And so my in-laws wanted to send us to a marriage conference as we were engaged. And I was like, whatever, what the heck? We don't need this to waste our time on this. And I just had this bad attitude towards like, you know, I just figured like by osmosis, I would pick this stuff up. And I went to the marriage conference, and in about 2 hours, I learned 15 things that were massively important to us in our marriage that I'm smart enough to realize I would never figure it out in 100 years if I hadn't gone to that conference. And so, you know, just, I think if you develop an appetite for reading solid relational books of all kinds, especially marriage relational books that are really good, that can be really helpful. And this isn't quite an emotional skill set, Rachel, but this is going to sound really dumb, but I was really sort of flabbergasted to find out after we were married that men and women approach some serious issues of life from very different perspectives. And that was a really good, important thing. And that's communication, but it's just relational stuff. You know, I just want to fix things. And a lot of guys do, right? And, you know, even when we were dating, I was happy just walking along, holding Kara's hand. Like, look at me, I finally got this figured out enough that I could walk along and hold somebody's hand. And Kara doesn't necessarily want me to just fix things. Sometimes she just wants me to listen. And, you know, the physical holding the hand was enough. She wanted to have somebody to talk to, right? And so, like, what seemed kind of cute in dating, I didn't realize had big foundational issues in terms of relational and how guys and girls process things, looked at them. And that's speaking broadly, there's always exceptions. But just learning a few basic things like that, man, we learned that early in our marriage, and it made a massive difference. And now I know that, you know, if I really want to connect with Kara, I better start by going on a walk and talking to her and listening to her, and not just trying to fix everything. And that's been a huge payoff and a huge thing to learn. So I don't know if that's an emotional skill set, Rachel, but just sort of realizing there was differences and then realizing how to take advantage of differences sounds transactional. How to celebrate those differences and work together is really, really been important. And what's really cool about this is I think the more we've discovered that, the more we've seen like how God has built some things that are really neat, right? Like the marriage works with each of us giving something different to the other that kind of forms a virtuous cycle. And that's a really cool thing. Like it's I think the world sometimes is like, oh, roll our eyes, and if guys would be more like girls, or if girls would be more like guys, or whatever. And what we've discovered is that, you know, the desire for physical connection in my head makes me really pay attention to Kara's emotional desires. And Kara's understanding my need for physical affection in my end really provides a pathway for us to connect emotionally. And, you know, it's easy to get that wheel out of balance, but when we get it spinning right, we really sustain each other and help each other in ways that are really cool. And you can sort of see a creative order that's pretty fascinating. So anyhow, sort of exploring that and figuring that out, looking at that and learning those things has been a big issue, a big advantage and a big blessing for us.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Jonathan, Kara, I know I don't want to keep you guys on for too late because it is rather late. But do you guys have any last thoughts for us, or any other pointers that you know, not really questions from us, but you know, things that you've seen in young people, even just unbound couples or not, that you think that we should look out for?
So should I go first and you'll correct me, get all right stuff, or should you go first to make sure we get the right things first?
Go ahead.
So I don't know, we covered a lot of stuff and I don't want to bore people too much, Abe. I think some of y'all have heard us talk about some of these things at Apexes and stuff like that, but when we got married, I just thought, you know, getting married was the thing that happened next, and I was excited. I was certainly excited to be married and all those kinds of things. But you know, then I was a little less excited when we found out we were pregnant, coming up on our, you know, we had Caitlin like 3 months after our first anniversary, and I distinctly remember thinking, "Gosh, it's all over now." You know, like the honeymoon's over. We were gonna like work 5 years and buy our farm and fulfill all our dreams, and now we're gonna be taking care of kids and stuff like that. And you know, the worst thing will happen is I'll be like almost 40 and have another one, and that's exactly what happened, right? And I joke and say I wanted 2 kids and Kara wanted 4, and we both got what we wanted. You know, 6 kids later, and I share that to tell you that was like so incredibly stupid, right? Like it was, but that's what I thought. And I had this complete attitude change, and all of a sudden, somewhere along the line, and this is due to homeschool conventions and good resources, stuff like that, I shifted from thinking that stuff, like a marriage was just sort of normal, and kids were just kind of a pain until we could figure things out and like get on to retirement. Like I realized that wasn't the point; they were the adventure, and that perspective shift has made all the difference to me. This has been the most exciting, amazing adventure I've ever been on. A buddy and I grew up together, we went to school together, and we were going to hike the Appalachian Trail, canoe the Nile, and I think float down the Mississippi. Like that was our big thing. And we were going to do it before we got married, because if people get married, they don't do cool things anymore. And like that was like our big mantra the whole way through. We both got engaged our junior year. We both got married, you know, within a year of graduating. Both of us have done family things since then. And neither one of us misses having hiked the Appalachian Trail for one little second. Like, this has been the coolest adventure each of us has been on. Nothing's been more exciting. Nothing's been more interesting. And, you know, you see that most in tragedy. Eventually, you're going to deal with tragedy. And we've had a couple of rough years of tragedy here recently. And I just can't imagine dealing with that without the kind of relationship that I've been able to have with Kara. Everything about life is easier. Everything about life is better. And I'm 1,000 million times of a better person than I would have been if it wasn't for Kara. Like, I see my sin reflected in her immediately, and I have to deal with it. And if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't. I'd find a way to not deal with it, and it would fester and get worse. And instead, she lovingly reflects that in a way that makes me have to address it. And that's not what people say when they get excited about marriage. They talk about all the adrenaline stuff, and that's really cool. but it's that long-lasting, deep, rich joy that permeates every piece of our lives. It's worth it. And I just guess would end with that like, you know, be wise, put Christ first, work at it, but have this perspective that this is the coolest adventure you're going to be on. This is the most interesting thing you'll do. And there's nothing you can invest in that'll make a bigger difference in your life outside of, you know, your investment in your relationship with Christ. And yeah, I can't add enough encouragement to that and just tell you how good it is. Not in the way you typically hear, but in a richer, deeper, fuller way. You want to say that in a more succinct way?
I think you handled it quite well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your wisdom. Yeah, I'm sure that, like, at least in my mind, there were like so many other questions, but I was just like processing everything that's been said. So yeah, I'm sure I'll email Jonathan some other more questions in the future or something. But again, thank you so much for being on and sharing your story. And yeah, hopefully somewhere down the road we can hear more from you guys. And yeah, if, you know, all of us in community have more questions, you know, we'll have a chance to be at Apex and ask them or something like that.
Thank you so much for having us both. I appreciate being on here. Generally, Jonathan is a much more, you know, talkative person in the family. I'm a little more quieter and prefer to be a little more comfortable to be in the background, but this has been fun. And certainly I'm glad to talk to anybody, you know, more individually. That I'm a little more comfortable in that setting, but I'd be glad to talk to anybody, you know, at Apex or whenever. So feel free to follow up with questions if you want to. And we don't have all the answers, but we're glad to share what we've learned.
Yeah, Abe, you set a record, man. Nobody has ever successfully asked Kara to do any kind of public presentation yet. So I don't know what you did, but it was pretty impressive.
I take that as a huge, huge honor. So thank you. But yeah, Jonathan, Kara, thank you so much again, and we'll see you around.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Good night.